the future of communication belongs to the poets and the storytellers. My first ever job that I got paid for was running weekends away for 11 to 14-year-olds. And I was a cross between, I don't know, I was a cross between like Anton Deck, Bear Grylls, and, Martin Luther King. Do you know what
There's
I mean?
an image.
I had to be a communicator. I had to be an adventurer. I had to be a Saturday night game show host. It was crazy. I wasn't anywhere near a natural communicator when I first started. We all suffer from those insecurities where we don't feel we're good enough. And I found my identity so often in what I accomplished. I had to realize my identity, who I am, does not come from kind of what I achieve, how well I'm doing in life, or what I look like, or what people think of me. And I think that's a huge battle that it's easy to say on a podcast, but is much more difficult over a lifetime of learning.
That was the absolutely inspiring Phil Knox. We're going to hear more about him, his dream, his story on the Someday Arrival podcast. Hi, welcome again to the Someday Arrival podcast. Whether you're starting out as an emerging leader, a young leader perhaps, or you're an experienced CEO or founder, hopefully we're here to help you change lives, make a difference, and reach your dream destination. I'm Darren Richards, and I'm joined as ever by my co-host Jyoti Patel, who today is in the Bahamas sunning herself. Is that right?
I love where your imagination goes, Darren, but no, I'm really not. I'm on the East Coast, and it's a nice sunny day, blue skies. Pretty cold, but it's all good.
So it's daytime. You're in New York, right?
I am. It's 5 hours behind you, but that will mean nothing to anybody because when this goes out, we won't know what time it was recorded.
Time is relative. Time is relative. And Jyoti, would you please introduce our honoured guest today?
With pleasure. So Phil Knox, you're an author, you're a speaker, and you're something I don't say every day. You're a missiologist. Is that how we say it?
That'll do. Missiologist.
Missiologist. Tell us. It's not a job description I come across, but I will go into what that is in just a moment. But from what my understanding is, you're very passionate about using your faith to build communities and help them thrive. And you've written some books recently, which you can talk about in just a moment. But for now, you are a performance poet. I know that wasn't always an easy path for you. Tell us how that came about, because you weren't always confident with the performance side of things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess I've always been someone who's wanted to communicate really well to people. And so for 13 years, that will look like working for a youth charity, wanting to communicate with young people. And if you ever tried to communicate with young people, they have very short attention spans, especially in the midst of a digital revolution. So I heard a quote somewhere from someone that said that the future of communication belongs to the poets and the storytellers. And I'd always loved stories from the kind of the moment I was born. I think I just loved stories, remember very vividly the stories I read as a child, but never done any poetry. And so I genuinely had this moment where I was like, if I'm going to try and engage the younger generations, is this something I could do? So I sat in a coffee shop one day, said, can I try and do this? And I guess the words just began to flow in a way that since then, over the last kind of decade or so, I've found a really effective way of communicating with people. But yeah, you're right. It was a very reluctant start.
Well, and you're right in what you're saying, that the attention span of the younger generation is not going to be 2-hour feature films or whatever, or box sets and that kind of thing. It's very short. It's very punchy. And poets, I think you're right. I think you're onto something there. But walk us through the journey. Like, how did you go from being a performance poet with little confidence at the start to doing what you're doing today as a missiologist?
Yeah, great. So for those listening who we've thrown the missiologist a word around a moment, my full-time job is trying to help the church here in the United Kingdom. I'm not in as glamorous location as you, JT, in the US. I'm in rainy Birmingham this evening in the middle of the UK. Come on. And so my job here in the UK is trying to help the church really engage all generations. But as a missiologist, I study specifically how people come to faith. And so I'm still trying to communicate with audiences of all ages. but yeah, that journey has been really fun. But I think it's an ongoing one. I think one of the leadership lessons I'd love us to reflect on this podcast is the power of practice and the power of habits and the power of kind of the rhythms and experiences that you have. And so I would go as far as to say I wasn't anywhere near a natural communicator when I first started, but the hours I've put in both in the private space but also in the kind of public space, in the experiences and making the most of the opportunities that have taken me on a road where I'm certainly not the finished article just yet. But over time, I've noticed that kind of experience bearing fruit and helping me get better. But on that journey, that's been a really helpful lesson.
Oh, well, you're right. My favorite phrase, one of them, is turning lemons into lemonade. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've been doing.
Yeah. So, Phil, tell us a bit more about this kind of the daily grind, the grit. We see someone like you. You are churning out books every couple of years. You're on platforms. You're on TV. You're on YouTube, and it looks like you've got everything together. Do you ever have moments, or did you have moments where you doubted yourself? Did you find certain skills more difficult to pick up? And also, are there habits now that you've developed that kind of keep you sharp and keep you going, keep your energy up? Yeah, kind of behind the scenes, below the water level line, I guess. What do we not see, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, let's lean first, shall we, into that kind of doubting ourselves thing. I think it's something we all go through. I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome. And I think we all suffer from those insecurities where we don't feel we're good enough. And I think if I reflect on my teenage years in particular, I found my identity so often in what I accomplished or what people thought of me. And I think to some extent still battling with some of that as in my middle age. And I think I had a few key moments where I had to realize my identity, who I am, does not come from kind of what I achieve, how well I'm doing in life, or what I look like, or what people think of me. And I think that's a huge battle that it's easy to say on a podcast, but is much more difficult over a lifetime of learning. And no matter what your faith perspective, I would encourage you to find something that's not finding approval from others or approval from what you do in terms of finding your core identity. For me as a Christian, that comes from knowing that I'm loved by God unconditionally, and that makes a huge difference. I think in terms of the other kind of aspect of approval, I was always quite good at school, so I was quite academically successful when I was captain of the school football team. But I think one of the challenges with that is that you're always pushing on to the next thing. There's always that kind of next high, whatever that is. And I think that's again a really slippery slope where you can, I think Jim Carrey said, he's climbed the ladder of success and realized there's nothing at the top. And I think the challenge with again finding your identity from that is that can be really problematic, because no matter how high you get, there's always more to go. And then, Darren, you alluded then to kind of some of the kind of habits and stuff. Those habits are absolutely critical, and the disciplines that I have in my life. So for me, every morning I try to get up about the same time. So I try to get up at 6 o'clock. And the first thing I'll do before I do any work is spend a moment. And again, as a Christian, I spend that in prayer and reading the Bible and silence and cup of tea. And just very ordinary, but that discipline for me of stilling myself and centering myself is really, really important, and then drives the whole of my day. And then you kind of alluded to some of the habits around writing and work. So as an author, I know when I'm good. And I think one of the really key things we learn when we lead ourselves is working out when we're at our best. And so I know for me, I'm at my best in between the hours of 7 in the morning and midday.
Right.
That's when I do my writing. That's my precious time. I hardly say yes to any meetings or phone calls in that period when I'm writing. And I have to be really disciplined about kind of protecting that time. And I think for all of us, we need to find that special time, those special moments. And then the rest of life probably falls in around my mornings. If you're a morning person, my deep encouragement to you is protect your mornings. If it's your evenings, do the same. But I think there's a couple of habits to get us started.
No, that's great. And I love that idea. There's a Harvard study that talks about managing your energy, not your time. I'm the same. There are certain times of the day where I'm on it, I'm sharp. If I've got to do something that's particularly difficult, decision or writing, that happens in the morning. If I'm working out or doing exercise, I'll do that 6, 7 at night, because I know that's when I could not work out in the morning. And so you just have to get to know yourself and your rhythms and get the best productivity out. And also there was something in there about, you were saying, there's that analogy, isn't there, of if you've got to fill a jar with stones, pebbles and sand, start with the big stones, put the big important things in first. You'll always find there's room for the others. Whereas if you start with the sand, it overflows, to kind of stretch the analogy. Yeah, great. Thanks, Phil. Really great.
Yeah, and also, Phil, you touched on a couple of things I'd like to come back to. Finding your identity in a world of social media, especially for the younger generation. But that's a really good point you make. It's always easy to be influenced by the number of followers, or to find, I don't know, happiness in that space. But there's obviously lots of mental health issues that can also arise because of people finding identity in other areas of their life. And the other thing I could really relate to, living out on this side of the world, is stillness. The importance of finding stillness. It's so hard to do, but doing it first thing in the morning does make sense, because it sets you up for the foundation as the rest of your day unfolds. So really good insights there. Thank you. And
yeah, can I just pick up on that social media thing? I think we need that, because I think the two are related around the discipline piece as well. And so I would encourage all of us to think about about disciplining ourselves around social media. So I don't know about anybody else listening. I sometimes find myself on Insta or Facebook Reels, and they know me. It's like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like someone has got. So for me, it's like, comedy clips, 1990s Aston Villa football clips, cricket from the England cricket team, and Formula One. And it just sends me, and I'm like, oh, I just got, and before you know it, like 40 minutes has gone. So so around the discipline piece, what I'd recommend is some curfews. So for me, I don't have my phone. I put my phone downstairs, so I don't ever sleep.
Put it to bed. Is it Rob? One of the authors talks about putting your phone to bed before you. Is that right?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, no, absolutely. So it changed my life back 10 years ago. Started sleeping next to a rubbish alarm clock rather than my phone. Changed my life. And the second thing is again having like kind of some rules. I need rules. So at the moment, I'm on a 47-day fast from my phone. I'm not picking up my phone. Not picking up my phone for another, I think it's 42 days.
I mean, there will be young people. I've got to say, Phil, there'll be young people listening who, what you've just said, it was
sorry, not from my phone, from social media. So I'm still using my phone.
It will send shivers down the spine. But I know you've done that before in the past, where you've basically made it a dumb phone. You called it a dumb, stupid phone.
Yeah.
You took off all the apps and you just took calls and texts, like old-fashioned
game changer.
Text. I mean, there are people going, you can't do that. You can't. It's impossible. You can't. It's like oxygen.
We can. And my observation is, so you take this morning, my writing time was so much more productive than the last writing day I did before then, because I wasn't, when you get that little momentary writer's block and you're like, I'll just check Instagram. I didn't do that today because I'm on a 47-day fast. I think if you find anything's mastering you, you have to, the only way of becoming the master of that thing again is to cut it off. Yeah. So I even did, and again, many listeners will balk at this. Some people will think it's no problem at all. I once had a year off sport. I gave up sport for a whole year. Now, again, as I've suggested from the algorithms and what I get sent, that was a really big deal for me. But you know what? It put it in its proper place in my life, and it's never quite had the same influence since. And so I think that's a really good discipline for us leaders to get into, because we don't want to be mastered by anything, do we?
No, true. And it takes a lot of courage to confront what you know is going to be something you're going to miss. So that is really helpful. So Phil, you talk a lot about habits. You seem very disciplined and compartmentalize your life to organize your time and get the best out of every day, which kind of ties into my next question, was the lessons that you've learned about leading others. And any other lessons that you'd like to share with people that are in leadership roles that could help them lead the best out of their teams?
Yeah, I think when it comes to leading both yourself and others, actually, I think you have to lead out of who you are. And I think you have to know yourself really well before you can lead others. But also, I think what I've found in terms of my leadership style, that you have to lead out of your personality. And as you might have guessed, if you're watching or listening to this, I'm a bit of an enthusiast.
Very shy,
So
very shy, Phil. Introvert.
very shy. But I'm actually quite, people don't believe this about me. I'm actually quite introverted. So I actually get energy from being on my own. But when I'm with others, and do you know what? Sometimes even when I'm on my own, I'm a really enthusiast. And so my leadership style is, you won't surprise you, I'm very high energy, I'm very enthusiastic, I'm very motivational in terms of getting people on the bus. But the other thing I found absolutely critical is leading by example within that. And so I've done all kinds of projects. My first ever job that I got paid for was running weekends away for 11 to 14-year-olds. And I was a cross between, I don't know, I was a cross between like Ant and Dec, Bear Grylls, and, Martin Luther King. Do you know what
There's
I
an
mean?
image.
I had to be a communicator. I had to be an adventurer. I had to be a Saturday night game show host. It was crazy. But I think what I found was, and I would recruit a team of volunteers for each weekend. Darren, I think you once came on one of these weekends.
I did. I was
Described it as the
one
most
of your
exhausting of your
eager
life.
recruits.
Yeah, but the only way I knew how to lead this team was just by getting involved in everything. So I was the first there. I was like, I was throwing myself into the setup. I was there trying to physically throw myself into that. I could have easily stood back and pointed at things, but I think to some extent that is, I've worked out that's the way I lead. And I think for all of us listening, if we lead others, doing so out of our personality. So again, as we've alluded to, I'm a communicator. So I use words a lot when I lead. And I think we need to work out how are we made, how are we created, and lead out of that. I think that's to some extent the only way I know how.
And what about some of the more tricky moments where maybe you have a plan and it doesn't go according to plan? You have this idea of being really extrovert and high energy, and it just doesn't land. Can you walk us through what that would look like?
It's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. So I think there's we always face when we lead, and in teams we always face kind of conflicts. And I think my experience has always been to be really honest. So I think about one team I was leading, and there was someone as part of that team, and it was one of those teams I stepped into to lead. And I sometimes I think you have to have very difficult conversations. I think I knew instinctively that the person I was leading would be slightly better in a slightly different role. And
that's a very polite way of I think that you'd really excel not in that role.
Yeah, I think for their sake and for mine.
Yeah. No, I know.
They were just a wrong fit in a wrong place. And so I think I think it's Jim Collins who talks about one of the first things that great leaders do is they get the right people on the bus, and they're in the right seats. And I think the two pieces of advice I would give around that is, first of all, especially if you're an activist leader like myself, I think the mistakes I've made in leadership are when I felt I've had to prove myself immediately and kind of almost not take time to listen and to consider. And I think my biggest mistakes in leadership are when I've kind of charged in and gone, I'm going to change the world on day one.
Yeah.
And I think those of us who are enthusiastic and activists, I joke to you, but that's kind of what we do.
It's
and
the passion.
We have to rein that instinct in.
Yes.
But I would also say the other mistake I've made is then not having those conversations over the long term. So I think we can fall into one or two of those traps, either rushing in or never dealing with the issue. And I think there's probably there's a kind of a wide window probably in the middle where you go, actually, I'm going to take time to reflect, but actually this person's not in the right seat on the bus, so I'm going to move.
I heard a quote the other day which has stayed with me, which is conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. That actually thinking, I hope this just goes away on its own.
Yeah,
very rarely works. Obviously, you want to be kind in the way you're dealing with it, but conflict, you have to, whether or not it's nice or painful, you have to deal with these things directly, and that's leadership. It's confronting the issue,
making difficult decisions, having awkward conversations, but somehow trying to get people on board and bring out a better outcome. But Phil, when I hear you, I do recognize a certain part of myself. You're very charismatic, you're very passionate, you're very driven. Who are your role models for leadership when you were growing up?
Great question. I think to some extent my role models were not the obvious ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably that my biggest role model was my dad, probably.
Yeah.
And the hard thing for me is my dad died when I was 21. So I didn't really see I didn't really see him as a leader when I was an adult, really. So I didn't see much of that. But I think for me, I guess when of all the things I've talked about, apart from social media, because he wasn't around when he was alive, all the things I've talked about, I've kind of I learned from him, really. So the discipline piece
Mm-hmm.
and the habits piece. Again, I just saw that in abundance. And I think he would always say he was an amazing lawyer. He was senior partner of a law firm, absolute top of his game. He'd have been a great guest on this podcast. They would have hated it because he was that's where I get my introversion from. He was a painful introvert and led in a very, very different way. But he would always say things like, I'm not the most talented person by any stretch, but I work hard.
I love that.
And I think some of that kind of that enthusiasm and that work ethic I've really picked up from my dad. And I think the other thing is the example piece. So dad was, as I said, senior partner law firm. He was a very, very wealthy man. And we could have lived probably in most houses in Birmingham, the city where we live. But he chose to live on a council estate, a very kind of poor, top 2% of deprivation in the country, because of what he believed and what he really felt called to live amongst the poor and serve the poor and be part of that faith community where he felt really called to be.
And
And
I have
felt,
to say, the acorn doesn't fall too far from the tree there, Phil, because you're successful, you're in a high ranking role, and you've chosen to live somewhere that's slightly more deprived. Is that right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And but I guess that's the example that I saw there. I as a Christian really made me think there must be something to this faith thing, because it was so lived out in such a sacrificial way by my dad. But I think it was also that wherever he was, he led by example. I'd occasionally see him on a football pitch, like tearing around, leading by example in that context. In his law firm, as the senior partner, again, was just really the way he treated people. It didn't matter whether you were the post boy or a government minister. I would love that kind of Rudyard Kipling line, which says, "If you can walk with kings yet maintain the common touch."
Yeah.
And dad would stop on the way to work, wind his window down, and give his gloves to a homeless person, and then the next minute pick up a phone call on speakerphone on the car phone. Remember those? On the car phone to, like, the Minister for Housing or something. And he just had this amazing ability to relate to people at both ends of the social spectrum. And it was the example piece. I think in whatever sphere you lead, my encouragement would always be to lead by example.
And well, first of all, he sounds like an amazing man, and I'm sure he'll be really proud of what you have accomplished and who you are and how you go about your life. You sound like Darren said, you don't sound like you're that much different, to be honest. And it's interesting what you say, Phil, because when we think about role models, we look out into the big wide world and we think, oh, they've got to be really high profile and celebrity, or on the cover of Forbes. But actually, some of our best role models are in our homes, on our doorsteps. And for you and for me, our fathers seemed like they were those kind of strong role models that really set those values and that work ethic. So that's really important to share, I think, with people that are listening.
So Pastor Celia Appiace-Collins says that leaders model and followers mimic. You could say to your kids, "Do as I say," but they're not. They're going to say, "I'm going to do as you do. I'm going to copy you." They're basically going to be a mini version of you, whether you like it or not. That's what they're going to see, and that's what they'll end up living out. So what kind of attributes do you want your kids to see? Do you want your followers and your team to see? What are the qualities that a good leader has? Not necessarily a successful leader. There are successful leaders who we don't necessarily want to emulate, but a good leader, you look at their character and they are go.
Wow. I mean, there's a seminar right there, Darren. Let alone a 3-minute answer on a podcast.
We've got a couple of hours to take time.
We'll have a go. Great. I think if I think about the kind of leaders that I want to follow and what they demonstrate, I think the first is passion. So I think there's something about, I've been in interviews where I've interviewed leaders, and unless they grab me with their passion in the first few minutes, I want a leader, I want to follow someone who says, "We're going over the top to almost certain death. Are you with me?" That's
No, the
the
answer is
kind
no,
of
by the way, Phil. But thanks,
great.
thanks for
Well,
the
that's
invitation.
there you go. Well, there are some leaders though who we look at and we follow, and we're like,
Yeah,
yes, I'm with
I'll do
you.
that.
And I think for me, I think I want to embody some of that passion. I want to live for a cause that's bigger than myself, and I want those who lead me to also embody some of that passion as well. So I think if we're looking to lead, and I know Darren, in your book, you talk so often about finding that passion, finding that cause, going after that dream.
Mm.
But unless we've got that, it's very difficult to fake that. And so I think that passion at the very heart is really, really important. I think the second thing I'd say is around relationships. So I think all the leaders I know want to be like and have followed are not necessarily extroverted, not necessarily kind of charismatic, but just have a relational wiring where they understand people and are really good at making friends. And so we alluded at the beginning about the kind of about my passion around friendship and the kind of the challenges of that. I think leaders not only need friends, but secondly, I think there's something about the personal qualities that we need to have is we need to be relationally wired, and we need to work on those abilities to be able to connect with other people, but also need to work on the abilities to listen to other people and others and understand people. There's no point saying, "Here's my vision, my way or the highway. Follow people." You learn to lead also by understanding other people. That's second thing. The third thing, I guess we've lent into quite a bit already, is around being really hardworking. There is
Mm.
there's no way, you can succeed in anything unless you work hard at it.
There's
What's
no
the
shortcut.
is it the Alex Ferguson quote? It says that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Great.
I think there's something powerful about that, and he will have worked with footballers who
Mm.
had immense talent but didn't work hard. And there
Hmm.
are some obvious examples of that. But then there's others who didn't have as much talent as others, but worked their backsides off and got to places where the more talented players should have been.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying about well, it's all interesting, but the thing that stayed with me is you don't have to be charismatic and loud or enthusiastic to be a good leader. You look at Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, very different types of leaders, both very successful. You and I have known CEOs even of the same organization that can be chalk and cheese, but successful for the season and for the task and for what that organization needs at the time. So yeah, I think that's really important that you might be listening to this, watching this and thinking, gosh, I don't think I could be quite as excited about life as Phil is. That's okay, because you can lead in your own way quietly, but as long as you're doing it confidently,
Mm.
that,
But you look at Steve Jobs, and
yeah,
he certainly
yeah,
embodied passion,
he did.
relational wiring, and hard work like few others.
Yeah. The hard work, I think, is a given.
I was just saying, some people are very charismatic, but there's not much substance behind the words and the
Yeah.
bravado as well. So it's about marrying up the substance with, if you are going to be charismatic and all of that, it's about making sure that that lands in a way that has sincerity, I imagine, because there are people out there who talk the talk, but not everybody can walk it. So I don't know what your experience of that's been, Phil, but I've definitely seen that in different spheres of leadership from my end.
Well, let's yeah, I'd like to hear that as an answer, really. So, what about when you find yourself under a bad leader, or even a poor leader, or a leader who you can't respect, but you're in the right place, you're still got to do your job, but the people around you, or perhaps just above you, gosh, their values are not quite what I'd hoped. Have you had that situation, or what could you tell someone who finds himself in that situation? We haven't, sadly, all got the greatest boss in the world. I've got a brilliant boss, I have to say, if he's listening, but we haven't always got the greatest boss, and I haven't always had good bosses in my career. What do you do rather than leave? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I've sadly got very little to offer here, in the sense that I've always worked under people who I've just really, really admired, and I think to some extent, I wonder whether that's partly because I've kind of chosen those who I've kind of worked with, and I think
Mm.
I think one of the key learning points is actually when we do move, kind of whether it's career or kind of whether we're in a voluntary thing, trying to see that is there chemistry with the
Mm.
person we're going to be serving with, because I think that chemistry piece is so underestimated when we think about those we serve with. And I guess one of my kind of areas of passion and study really is around friendship and that relational connection. And I think we don't often think about, you know, when we apply for a job, you know, there are lots of things in that list that we give ourselves in terms of kind of pay scale and do I kind of meet the requirements, and is this in line with my values, etc. before we consider that chemistry piece. So I think that's a really, really important factor. And so when we're going into job interviews, asking who's going to are you going to be managing me, and you can get a sense in those interview spaces as to whether that chemistry is going to be there, and even asking for a meeting beforehand if that's possible, to be able to
the
do that.
salary, I mean, these days you can be attracted by a salary, by a great job title, even by a great working environment and off physical space. You're absolutely right.
But I think to actually answer the question, what do you do if you're in a space? The answer is I don't know, because I've never been in one. But I think you have to ask yourself the question: how long is this leader going to be around for? And can I last the course? And is it worth me lasting the course before I look elsewhere to find someone I do want to serve with? I think if the answer to that question is longer than 2 or 3 years, would be my threshold probably, I'd begin to think about going elsewhere.
That makes a lot of sense. And it takes me on to what I'm thinking about now, which is the road of success. It's something that we mention in this podcast. Our favorite quote by John C. Maxwell: "There's no success without succession." When you think about lasting impact and being the kind of leader that you are, how do you envisage your legacy?
I'm not sure I think very hard about that, Jody.
Feels too humble to think about a legacy.
I'm not sure.
We'll have to think about
and hopefully young enough as well. I think I'll probably be, when I'm in my 60s, I'll be thinking about legacy. But I think probably, I mean, I think in some ways, you know, what's that quote, you know, from Charles Spurgeon, I think, who says, you know, carve your name not in marble but on human hearts. That's not bad. That's not bad, is it, in terms of kind of legacy? I think there's something about investment in others. And again, it's really interesting. You talked about my dad. Actually, if I think about my kind of legacy, if you like, none of it's actually even professional. Do you know, when you ask that question, I think about the people. My best mates have got a called Ads, and we've been friends since we were like 13 years old at school. I think, and you know, he came from, he had a real kind of challenging background. One of the big moments in his life that happened, I was a Christian at school, as a Christian teenager, and this, you know, sometimes led to people saying, you know, this is Phil, he's a Christian, but he's all right. Like I kind of had I had disease. Do you know what I mean? You know, it wasn't the street cred thing to have or do in a, you know, sporty boys school. So, but with Ads wasn't a completely non-Christian background. Dad in and out of prison, kind of, you know, drink, drugs, girls, you know, etc. But I always wanted to kind of share something of my faith with Ads. And so when he was 21, he became a Christian, and his life was been completely turned around by that decision. We're still best mates, you know, 27 years on from meeting at school. He is the most amazing husband, community leader. He works for a building company. He's an amazing builder, but he mentors young lads along the way as a kind of outworking of his faith. He's an amazing kind of family guy, and I guess in some ways he you know, he's almost one of my greatest legacies in some ways. It's nothing to do with work and been paid for. You know, our neighbour across the road, this guy called Tommy, who we've just become really good friends. And again, he has this kind of similar story a little bit further behind Ads, but I think for me it's about people. And I think my encouragement to all of us who are in leadership situations: invest your life in people. And again, as a Christian, Jesus is such a great example of this to me, because he has impacted humanity more than any other person ever to have walked planet Earth. And yet, what did he choose to do? Well, first of all, he chose to invest most of his life in 12 disciples, and then had an inner circle of 3 friends, Peter, James, and John, who he invested a disproportionate amount of time in. And he did speak to the crowds, but actually he changed the world by investing in a few people. And I think probably that would be my...
Without Instagram or TikTok.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah,
he managed it.
It goes back to what we said earlier, though, doesn't it? We don't have to look that far away to have impact. It can be in our local neighbourhoods, in our homes, in communities. It can be with next door. So that's really helpful to know. Thanks, Phil. That's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So Phil, you're going to get in a time machine now, or you're going to be a hologram. I had a time machine before, so you can be a hologram. You're going to be projected. You're going off on your first weekend at the youth charity we used to work at, and you suddenly see this projection of future Phil, 20 years in the future, and he says, "Stop! I can make the next 20 years so much better for you. You just need to know what I've learned in the last 20 years. The one lesson, the one nugget I need you to know is." What would you tell younger Phil? What's a great piece of leadership advice?
My word. I think I'd say you don't have to do it all at once.
Okay.
I think genuinely, I would sit down. I had hair back then. For those watching the video version,
I know. I feel your pain, Phil. I'm
there
there.
you go, mate. There you go. My 11-year-old said to me recently, "Daddy, why don't you take some hair from your legs and put it on your head?" I reminded him that genetics are a terrible thing and that he should enjoy
what
his
goes
hair
around comes around. Yeah.
while it lasts. That wouldn't be my advice, by the way. Enjoy your hair.
The hologram's just flickered and gone. You've wasted it.
But I really would say, I think I'd just say that you don't have to do it all at once. And I think sometimes, especially when we're new in jobs, we feel like we've got to prove ourselves straight away, burst onto the scene, like a Premier League footballer scoring a hat-trick on their debut. You don't have to do that. And I think probably in as I've got older and as I've started new jobs and started, in different phases of life, I've kind of just taken my time a little bit more and kind of and fought the tendency to get my proof of my identity from the first reactions, from the first weekend, from the first year. Actually, we do have time. We do have time and I think when we just linking back to that previous question about our legacy in relationships take time. Those long-term investments in people. No surprise that the example I gave was over 27 years. Actually, I think the advice I would give is that you can't manufacture that in a very short space of time.
And again, we talked in a previous episode about people expecting to get it overnight. You talked about hard work, hard graft. I think sometimes, people expect to be able to do the relational things quickly. Some of our guests are saying they're working on 10-year horizons, 10-year time spans.
Yeah.
We're investing in people, investing in communities. I honestly think, genuinely, that's counterculture today. We want to put our money in Bitcoin and get and make 500% next week. And why hasn't it happened yet? Or if you're an actor like Jyoti, I've done an audition. I've done 3 auditions now. Why am I not on primetime TV? Because life doesn't work like that. Stephen Bartlett, the famous social media entrepreneur, says like, don't do like 5 bits of content, do 500. Don't send your example to one company, send it to 1,000. Like he says, you just got to keep doing it and keep putting it out there. It's going to be harder than you think.
That's so true.
All the best things take time, don't they?
They do.
Whether we're talking, all the best kind of things that we drink and things that we eat and experiences and books and even babies take do you know what I mean? And talent, it all takes time.
Yeah, it does. I look at life like a garden. I always think it's like nurturing a plant, isn't it?
Great example.
Give it sunlight, and then that's when you see the fruits start to develop.
Really
but
good.
About you're a very excitable person, I can tell, Phil. I'm afraid to ask you the next question. But
calm down, Phil. Calm down.
No, it's lovely. It's lovely. Bring it on. But what are you currently the most excited about in your life? What's next for you?
It's going to explode now.
Yeah, exactly. For me, my great passion at the moment is friendship. Yes. Which I think has come through probably through some of the stuff I've shared about. I had a terrible pandemic. One of the things that happened is my mum died. It was really I was an author. My first book came out in March 2020, the week all the bookshops closed. But it was just the 2 things got me through: faith and friendship. And it was a time of real social distancing and social isolation. And at a time when I needed people the most, I was most socially isolated. And so I began to really research friendship, and I've just discovered it is just the need for our world at the moment. 1 in 3 men say they have no close friends. It's not much better for women. 40% of young adults say they always often feel lonely. And so my great passion at the moment is wanting to see one friend made at a time, and equip and inspire all of us to strengthen our relational muscles and prioritize this relationship that is in such neglect. And so that's the reason I wrote the book, The Best of Friends. That's the reason I'm writing poetry and speaking at the moment over 100 times a year on this. And it's completely captivated me. So again, what does, back to the previous question, what does success look like in 10 years' time? Are there less lonely people? Are we more united and less fractured as a society? Do we have leaders that are less isolated because we need friends, not just colleagues and followers? Though that's my current area of passion at the moment. And so for all of us listening, my deep encouragement: don't miss out on the most important, least talked about relationship in your world.
So important. And I can relate to that, having moved out here just before the pandemic, trying to make friends with everything being virtual and social bubbles and all that stuff. It takes time. And try living here, people just revolve around this neighborhood like every 12 months. You make friends, they move to another place, and it's an interesting world. But I think in today's world, loneliness is not just for the elderly. There's plenty of young people who don't seem lonely on the outside, but are very lonely on the inside. So that sounds very worthwhile. You talked about books. What's your current book, and how can we support your next venture?
So the book is called The Best of Friends. Choose wisely, care well. Get it wherever you get your
in all good bookshops.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my deep encouragement at the moment would be to read that. There are small group resources available as well that you can find alongside the book at philknox.co.uk. And my deep encouragement, wherever you're at, I mean, to be honest, I don't care if you read the book or do the video stuff. My passion is that you invest in friendship. I hope my book and the resources that I've created can help you on that journey. But I think, one of the reasons I delved into this project is there's so little literature and so little, we don't talk about it anywhere near enough that we should be, considering how important it is to us. So yeah, be a great friend and throw yourself into friendship.
I love that, because you're right. The idea of researching friendship, that is a whole other podcast interview in itself. But I think you make a valid point. We live in a community. We need to learn to connect on a human level, relate, bring out the best in each other, and move away from everything that's just virtual. There's a place for virtual, but there's a place for real life connection as well. So thank you so much, Phil.
Yeah, thanks so much, Phil. For me, just that idea that, especially younger people want thousands of followers, but they might not have a single friend who's going to follow them through. I'm very fortunate, blessed to have called you a friend. I think I just worked out at 20 years now. Yeah, I'll keep stalking you for another 20 years or so. But we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your wisdom and your insights that come from such a genuine place like this. You live this stuff out. It's that we talked about modeling it. You absolutely embody this. So thank you for the example that you are, and thanks for joining us today. Oh, Phil is always great value. He's a really good friend. What did you think? You have not met him before, have you, Jyoti? What did you think?
I haven't, but just the fact he's researching friendship, who can say that as a topic of research? What a fabulous calling for his life and what he's doing. And I just think he's so passionate. It's hard not to connect to what he's talking about, and just living a life well lived is what struck me.
Yeah, he's living it out, isn't he? He lives, as I said in the podcast, he's living in not the most affluent area, but he loves the community. He's not doing some charitable act. He genuinely loves that community, and he wants to follow in his father's footsteps. So yeah, that's great. And he's involved in the local church, and he's very much part of his community. So when he's talking about friendships and community and not living online all the time, and even living without it for periods of time, he's absolutely walking the walk. So there's two words that came out for me. Obviously, his Christian faith and friendship came through really strong. And he was also talking a lot about, as a leader, you can't put your identity in a title or in a position or even a run of success, because eventually the success will dry up, or you'll have some crisis, and your identity has to be on something bigger. For him, it's faith. But, we all need something to ground ourselves that isn't just the best thing we've ever done, I suppose.
It's so true. We're so quick to define ourselves by careers or by, who knows, status, geographies, whatever it might be. But we're
social media following.
So many social media following in these days. But for all the things that we are, we're more than just one thing. We're the sum of so many. And like you say, to put your identity in an avenue that's going to give you benefits in the future is just very wise.
Absolutely. And you can hear more amazing, inspiring people like Phil on the podcast. Thank you for listening today or watching today. Some of the questions have been drawn from the book, The Plain Parable. You can find that on Amazon and also as an audiobook on Apple and elsewhere. Thanks again for joining us, for listening, for being part of this important conversation on what modern cutting edge leadership looks like today from real life leaders. Please do subscribe. Don't miss a future episode. Tell some friends. And until we meet again, please do make someday today.